Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Caitlin and I upload a whole bunch of different types of videos on this channel, mainly surrounding true crime as well as a little bit of university and lifestyle sprinkled in where I can. Today I'm back and I'm going to be discussing the case of Patricia MEEHAN. Now, as always with these cases, I am only human. I have to give this disclaimer because I think sometimes people can expect a lot more of me. So if I make a mistake in any of my videos, and I do sincerely apologise, all I can do is piece together these cases from the information I have online, and it's very hard sometimes to determine what sources are credible and what are not. So if I miss anything out or get anything wrong, I do really genuinely apologise. I'm not trying to offend anyone, any of these victims or their families. I don't mean any ill will by it whatsoever, and there will always be a disclaimer in the description if you want to check that out as well. Now the boring stuff is out the way, we're going to get straight on with discussing the case of Patricia MEEHAN. Patricia Bernadette MEEHAN was born on the 1st of November 1951 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This is where she lived for the majority of her early life until she was old enough to start college. When she reached the age of 18, she attended the Oklahoma City College in Oklahoma to study early childhood development. And as I'm sure you can imagine, she wanted to start a career in childhood development. She wanted to work with young children, and primarily sort of in a daycare setting, whether that be her own practice or anything. She just had this sort of love for working with young children. However, in the year of 1985, she decided that she wanted a complete career change, and this wasn't what she was almost destined to do. She wasn't supposed to go down this path. And so she decided to go ahead, change career paths, and follow her love of animals. She moved to a place that I can't quite pronounce. I believe it's Bozeman in Montana, and this is where she earned a job as a ranch hand, as her kind of main job. This is what she was hoping to sort of focus a lot of her love on, but then she did a couple of odd jobs around the local area just to sort of support her lifestyle. But primarily she worked with animals, she loved animals, and this is where she started out. On April 20th, 1989, a very strange accident occurred that ended in the disappearance of Patricia MEEHAN. Prior to the accident itself, the last known sighting of Patricia had been a conversation that she had had with her landlord, who'd said that at the time she did think it was kind of strange how Patricia was acting. She said she was a lot more hyper than usual, very, very overexcited and a little bit too eager, almost bouncing around. So it wasn't anything super out of the ordinary, but she said that she'd never seen her like that, and it was kind of a bit strange just how energetic she was. At around 8:15 p.m. on April the 20th of that year, a young woman named Peggy Bueller was driving with her father. They were in their car heading in the westerly direction on Montana Highway 200 when this strange incident occurred. When they were nearing a place called Circle in Montana, and Peggy had been driving, bearing in mind, she noticed that there was another car heading in the easterly direction, so in the complete opposite direction to the one that they were driving in, but it was in their lane. So this car was driving completely straight towards them in the wrong lane. Peggy noticed in enough time to suddenly swerve onto the hard shoulder to avoid a collision. However, the woman in the car driving behind Peggy and her father wasn't so lucky and collided with the oncoming car. The woman in the car behind that had been in the collision was being driven by an off-duty police dispatcher named Carol Heights. She luckily walked away from the collision absolutely fine. She was not injured, but as she exited her car, she watched the person, so the driver of the oncoming car, the car in the wrong direction, driving in the wrong direction, she stepped out of her car, and it was a blonde woman who started just walking straight towards her. Initially, obviously, this hadn't been strange. She'd assumed that she was approaching her to say sorry and to swap insurance details and to see if she was okay. But the woman didn't say anything. She just stared in her direction, but Carol Heights said that it was almost as though she was completely out of it. Her eyes were glazed over and she wasn't really looking at her, she was looking through her. And this woman stopped just arm's length away from Carol and just stared at her, like I said, as though she was looking through her. And as I'm sure you can imagine, this was really, really strange, especially from Carol's perspective. Peggy Bueller and her father got out of their car. Obviously they parked on the hard shoulder, witnessed the collision, gotten out to see if they needed help, but as they were exiting their car to try and give help to Carol or the other woman, this strange blonde woman, who still hadn't spoken or made any indication that she was hurt or if she was okay, she just walked away off to the side of the road. So she climbed over the fence fence and just faced the accident and just stared. She stood off the road just staring directly at the collision and the three people just witnessing this strange act. Peggy had even said that watching this woman climb over the fence and just stare back at the collision that she had caused, it was so eerie to her, and it was like if anyone had driven past and seen this woman stood by the side of the road, they would have just thought that she had perhaps been a witness to the collision because she removed herself from it, not as though she had actually been a part of it. It was all very strange. And after a few moments of her standing there motionless, just staring at the collision site, the woman just turned around and began walking into the vast empty field behind her and pretty much disappeared into darkness. So Peggy's father had gotten out of the car by this point to stand with Carol, as she'd obviously been a victim in this collision, just to check that she was okay, and he instructed Peggy to drive into the nearest town to ring for help. Police arrived not long after, but they searched the area and they were unable to find any sign of this dazed woman who they had seen, and she wasn't anywhere in the surrounding areas. She simply vanished into darkness. Police were able to run the vehicle's license plate to determine who the owner of the car was, and this was confirmed by the witnesses once they showed the image of the person's driver's license, and they confirmed it was a person that they had seen as part of the accident, and this person was in fact Patricia MEEHAN. A hunt then ensued in search of Patricia, not only for causing this accident but mostly in concern due to her strange demeanour, and potentially she could have been hurt in the accident, but she had seemed quite strange beforehand anyway, so there was just a lot of concern for her safety. Police managed to find a set of tracks which they later determined to have been left by a pair of women's tennis shoes, and this was in a field around 0.75 miles away from the crash, so it seemed likely that they would have belonged to Patricia. This, paired with the fact that they matched her shoe size perfectly, police decided that it was best for them to follow this trail into the night just to see where they ended up, in hopes of them finding Patricia maybe passed out somewhere from exhaustion or lost somewhere. So they followed these tracks through the night until around 3 AM when the tracks just suddenly disappeared due to the terrain. And sadly, because they had no tracks to follow, they had to pause the search until daylight because they had no way of indicating any direction that she could have headed in. Patricia's family headed straight to Montana. They plastered her face and her name all over the local area in hopes that maybe someone had come across her dazed and confused and taken her in and just looking after her, and perhaps she couldn't remember who she was or why she was there, so they were hoping that someone may have seen or any knowledge of where she could have been, but sadly nothing came about. And as time passed, the search for Patricia became larger and more desperate and panicked, because obviously the last that they'd known of her was that she walked off alone without any form of safety. She had had nothing with her, none of her belongings, into this wilderness, and they had no clue which direction she could have gone in. Now the area surrounding, well, the potential area that she could have headed in was rather mountainous. It was could potentially become quite dangerous if you weren't, if you didn't have the items to survive, if you didn't have a kit or anything. Now obviously she had just come straight out of a car crash. She was in tennis shoes. She likely didn't have anything with her. They had no bag. And so the surrounding mountainous areas were searched. They had a helicopter sent out as well as dogs, but they were ultimately fruitless in their search for any hint of Patricia. There were a number of abandoned coal mines in the area, so they became suddenly concerned that perhaps she could have wandered into one and gotten lost or fallen or injured herself, anything. But again, these were searched through and nothing could be found, so they had no idea just where she had gone. So investigators' first theory had been that when they lost her tracks, she had managed to find herself back to a main road of some sort and hitchhike her way out of Montana, just mostly to escape the accident. But when they acted upon this theory, this idea's potential route, they couldn't find any witnesses, anyone who had picked her up, seen her walking along any of the nearby roads, so it seemed more and more unlikely that this would have been the case. And pretty much any theory that they could have come up with, or any idea of what could have potentially happened to her, there was no plausible explanation. There was always something wrong with the theory. Even why she was in the area in the first place, it was nowhere near where she had been living and working at the time, so they didn't really know why she'd been driving in that direction to begin with. Now, a prominent factor that a lot of people seem to remember about this case in particular is a photograph that had been developed after her family found a roll of film in amongst her belongings, and it was kind of an eerie photograph. It wasn't anything necessarily to do with her case, it was just it kind of sticks in your memory. So the photograph was simply a self-portrait of her in a mirror, but it is very formal and it's very strange. Like I said, it's quite eerie. So a lot of people remember this photograph because it was obviously taken not too long beforehand, and it's very, very strange to think about. Patricia had also allegedly been suffering from a spout of depression at the time of her disappearance, and she allegedly had made an appointment with her therapist and the day later on in the day after the day that she went missing. So she went missing obviously early hours of the morning, and she was allegedly supposed to have an appointment that afternoon. So people think perhaps she was travelling in that direction towards her therapist, but it doesn't make sense of why she would have been there so early. It really is hard to find any plausible explanation for any of the behaviours that day. And one belief that has been widely shared throughout the case, and still to this day, a lot of people still support it, a lot of close loved ones of Patricia still almost hope in this case that this is what happened, is that she is somewhere living out there perfectly healthy, but she was suffering from amnesia because of the accident, and so she couldn't remember who she was, where she was from, and started a new life. So many people still choose to believe this to this day because it's obviously quite hopeful, and I really do hope that's the case. I hope that nothing happened to her and she just sadly suffered from amnesia and is out there perfectly okay. According to Wikipedia, there have been more than 5,000 sightings of women matching the description of Patricia Meehan since her disappearance on that day in 1989, which is crazy. Obviously most of them will be false sightings, they won't necessarily be confirmed, but it's such a large number that you've got to wonder whether it is likely that she is still out there somewhere. She just had no memory of who she once was. One sighting in particular came from about a month after her disappearance from Lervain in Minnesota, and this sighting claimed to have seen her sat alone in a restaurant until it shut pretty much the entire time it was open, in the space of a day, until it shut late at night. And this is when she then walked to a nearby 24-hour diner, and where she continued to just sit in a booth and not move. Someone saw this, obviously reported it to the police because they were concerned about her. She didn't seem to have anywhere to be and she wasn't speaking to anyone. And when an officer approached her, she refused to move and she refused to share her name, and so she left. The day after this, she was seen as being in South Dakota in a truck stop diner, and then later in that same day in another area of South Dakota. And later this same month, she was allegedly seen in a restaurant in Bozeman, back where she was living originally. And the witness said in this case she looked particularly stressed and she ate very quickly. One witness even said that at this point she was seen talking to herself, and when a waitress tried talking to her, she just seemed to be in a hurry. She wanted the check really quickly, and she seemed like she just didn't want to stay there. And the week of this report as well, another one came in saying that a woman matching Patricia Meehan's description had been hovering in Billings, Montana at a horse auction, which obviously when you think back to her career, it makes a lot of sense. She was living in the area working as a ranch hand, so it wouldn't be unlikely that she would still find herself with interest in horses. On May the 30th of that year, a sighting reported her as walking along Interstate 90 in Washington, and a witness who was a truck driver had pulled over, stopped and offered her a lift to wherever she was going, but she simply refused and continued her journey. This particular sighting was also corroborated by a female driver. She had been driving along the same route. She'd also spotted her, and when she also stopped to offer a lift or see if she needed help, she told the woman that her car had broken down and she was just walking for some help and she didn't need any help from anyone else, she was sorting it. So this didn't initially obviously seem strange to any of the drivers, but upon hearing of this case and the search for Patricia Meehan, they obviously thought it was a likely scenario that she could have been wandering along, just completely lost and not know where she was going. And the next week, she was seen in a place called Tacoma in Washington at a truck stop. She was allegedly harassing customers. Some claim that she had been asking them for directions to a place called Aberdeen in Washington, which is all very strange. No one really knows, again, if this is her, why she would be going to Aberdeen, anything, but it is one of the potential sightings of Patricia Meehan. In June of that same year, a number of sightings were reported, and some were even followed up on that were actually confirmed or strongly believed to be Patricia. And many of these sightings actually had followed a route, so there had been a number of pit stop points on a route to Seattle. On the flip side, there were a number of reports that they were able to confirm weren't Patricia. So there were a lot in Idaho. There was I think she was arrested. There was a woman arrested in Idaho that looked eerily like Patricia. Even some of her close family members and people who loved her, who knew her very well, were saying that it was eerily similar. This woman sounded like her as well, but it's believed to not be Patricia. Patricia will have been missing for 30 years this April, and sadly there have still been no answers and anything really that happened to her on that fateful day. As I said, the most prominent belief is that she's living somewhere, living a completely different life with no recollection of her life beforehand, which is heartbreaking to think about, but still remains hopeful. So a lot of her loved ones still remain hopeful that she is somewhere out there, just unaware of who she was. So let me know your thoughts down below, whether you think this is the likely scenario or whether perhaps one of these sightings of her was her. It's all very strange. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this interesting, and I'll see you guys soon for another video. Bye!